Okay, good morning. My name is Kevin Lomangino, and I'm the director of KGL Consulting, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to a discussion on India, its position in the global research landscape, and the factors that may well propel its output of quality research to new heights in the coming decade. This is a topic that we decided to propose initially as a result of interest from our consultancy clients at KGL. As most of you in this room are aware, societies and other scholarly publishers are competing harder than ever to attract more high-quality manuscript submissions from around the world. And success depends not only on having a solid pipeline today, but understanding and anticipating where those good papers may be coming from in the future. Our clients have asked us to explore what's happening in India, where reforms to the nation's education and research funding infrastructure have it poised to make great strides in expanding the quality and quantity of its scholarly output. Now, at the same time, we cannot ignore the significant challenges that the country will face as it seeks to modernize, nor should we underestimate the challenge that scholarly publishers will face as they seek to engage more fully with this author community. Luckily, we have an exceptional panel of speakers today to guide us through this complicated landscape, starting with Dr. Kishore Satpathy, who is Chief Librarian at the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, overseeing the Library, Documentation, and Information Science Division. He has more than 24 years of experience in India's library sciences community and is the recipient of many prestigious awards. Kishore will give us an overview of India's higher education and research funding infrastructure, as well as the reforms that many observers anticipate will drive significant growth in that sector in the future. Next up, we have Dr. Akila Sridhar, who is a deputy editor for scientific reports at Springer Nature. She joined the publishing industry in 2018 and has over 6 years of experience as an editor working with various open access journals, including the BMC series journals. Akila has a PhD in microbiology from the University of Aberdeen and has over 11 years of research experience in cancer biology, neuroscience, and developmental biology. She will explore how scholarly publishers can engage with the Indian research community to help build equity. And finally, we'll hear from Chris Reed, who is the Director for Product and Publishing Development at the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Washington. Chris was previously an executive publisher for STM Journals at Oxford University Press, where he worked for nearly 20 years before joining AAAS. He will focus on what he sees as the key areas where publishers need to prepare for the coming growth that is expected from India. So we have a lot of ground to cover today and not all that much time to do it. So I'm going to hand it over right now to Dr. Satpathy, who will start us off. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thanks to ALPS and Kevin for this opportunity. I'm Kishore Satpathy from Indian Statistical Institute, where the roots of computing in India were first established. The first indigenous computer of India was developed at ISI Calcutta. The first 2 digital computers of Indian subcontinent was installed at ISI Calcutta. We take pride for developing OCR technology for the indigenous Indian languages. And it is one of the oldest institutions in the country. We are under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation under Government of India. It is in the line with other institutions like Indian Institute of Technologies or Indian Institute of Management. Today I am excited to talk to you about the subject that is becoming increasingly significant in the publishing world, that is India rising, unlocking the new horizons for publishers. India's growth is reshaping the global publishing landscape with becoming economic and diverse population of 1.4 billion people with rising digital access, the country presents unique opportunity for the publishers. This presentation will explore how the growing number of diverse institutions with enhanced funding and new bold initiative like One Nation, One Subscription, and are all unlocking the new horizons for publishing industry in India. This slide will show you the overall scenario of education sector in India. You will find there are a number of institutions in India, starting from institutions of national importance, such as Indian Institute of Technologies, Indian Institute of Management, that is called IIMs, NITs, National Institute of Technologies, ICERs, Indian Institute for Scientific Educational Research, IIITs, that is Indian Institute for Information Technologies, AIMS, All India Institute of Medical Research, and ISI, and few other institutions. They number around 165. And we have 216 number of research institutions, which includes CSIR, that is Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, ICAR, Indian Council for Agricultural Research, Indian Council for Medical Research, DRDO, Defense Research and Development Organizations, and institutes under Indian Space Research Organizations. And there are number of central universities are there. There are number of deemed universities are there. Number of private universities are there. These private universities are now taking a boom in India. Lot of private big players, industrialists, they are investing money in these private institutions. Recently, the Geo has launched Geo University, and we have all major industries, they have put up their own universities in India. And apart from that, we have large number of untapped institutions, which are primarily colleges. We have around 45,000 colleges. Out of that, 14,000 colleges provide master's programs and PhD program. And if you look into the publishers' perspective, they are focusing only the first few institutions that are the only institutions of national importance or institutions of repute like central universities or research institutions. But they are not focusing the untapped market, that is the colleges. And I would urge that you should, in your priority, you should urge to look into this untapped market also. And the enrollment in India is also increasing. The All India Survey on Higher Education data reveals that there is an increase of 26.5% of student enrollment from 2015 to 2022. That is from 34.2 million to 43.3 million. During that period, the female enrollment has also increased by 31%. So this reflects that there is and there will be an increased demand for educational resources, that is books and journals, and that is an opportunity for the publishers. Similarly, if you look into the research and progress in India, India's progress in research and development is evident through increasing number of patents. Last year, 100,000 patents were granted in India. According to WIPO, India saw highest growth, that is 31.6% in patent filing in 2022. India's rank in Global Innovation Index has improved to 40th position in 2023 from 81st position in 2015. Similarly, the R&D funding is increasing in India. Though India spends 0.64% GDP in research and development, but the growth is significant. This year, Government of India has announced a significant substantial amount in research and development through Anusandhan Research Foundation. That is 1 lakh crore in Indian currency, which is a very big amount. Further, the private investment in the research and development is rising. As a publishers, you have to focus on that also. The slide shows that around 36 percentage of funding comes from private institutions, and they are spending a lot in research and development. These slides also show that the private investment in the research and development sector is increasing day by day. And if you look into the publications output, because of this research funding, the publication output is increasing day by day. And now over the years, it has increased from 3.1% in 2010 to 5.1% in 2020. And the PhD enrollment in India also increasing day by day. Now come to the one of the major initiative that India is taking, which is going to change the entire research ecoculture in India. One Nation, One Subscription is a bold initiative of Government of India, which aims to improve access by eliminating paywalls for millions of Indian researchers. One Nation, One Subscription will democratize access to research, enabling researchers and students from diverse backgrounds to benefit from scholarly content, and it will strengthen the research ecosystem in India. Currently, the institutions are spending around 1,000 crores, that is 10 billion Indian rupees on subscriptions, around 300 crores, that is 30 billion Indian rupees on APC for making article available in the open access platform. Currently, Government of India is negotiating with 36 publishers for more than 13,000 journals with an estimated budget of 2,000 crores, that is 20 billion, including 150 crores, that is 1.5 billion for APCs. This will cover around 6,300 institutions and with an estimated 18.7 million of users. Our concern is that they are negotiating with 36 publishers only. There are several other publishers who are who will be left behind, and this is the right time for the publishers. They should talk to at the highest level of Government of India. If you look into the publishers, these are the 36 publishers, those who are negotiating with the Government of India. My concern is that because government is spending a huge amount of money on this, what they are planning, though these are not available in the public domain, they are planning to pull out resources from all the institutions through their ministry, not from the institutions directly, through their ministries, and they are pumping into single platform. So then the institutions will be left behind with only very few resources to subscribe other resources. Therefore, this is a high time for other publishers, those who are not listed in this One Nation, One Subscription negotiation scheme, to come forward and talk to the government so that they can be included in the One Nation, One Subscription. Though One Nation, One Subscription is being managed in a phased manner, this is in the first phase, only 36 institutions are being covered, 36 publishers are being covered, and they are covering only government institutions. So you are free to negotiate with the private institutions. But in the second phase, government is planning to include the private institutions also. The funding for this One Nation, One Subscription will come through Anusandhan Research Foundation. The Government of India has taken several initiatives to enhance the investment in research and development and to improve country's research ecosystem. The recent enactment of ANRF Act 2023, operationalized by Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, underscores government effort to strengthen the research and development ecosystems. This act aims to bridge India's research and development investment gap while nurturing the robust research culture with higher educational institutions. Government of India will spend around 500 billion in next 5 years. And to conclude, Indian education sector's diverse landscape and increasing funding through ANRF and increasing research output presents significant opportunities for publishers. Price sensitivity, rising journal cost, rising APCs, and non-availability of local content by the publishers pose major challenge to the international publishers. But untapped market potential, one nation, one subscription, rising open access adoption provides avenues of growth for collaborations for the publishers. Thank you.
Thanks, Kishore. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to continue the theme of India and India Rising, but what I'm going to present today is something a bit more personal based on what I have gained as experience from working with Indian research communities, both as part of it, where I started my research career in India almost 20 years ago at National Research Institute, but also kind of working with Indian authors, Indian reviewers, and more recently, Indian editors who are now part of the team that we've recently established in India. Let's actually all look at this one. I think Kishore alluded to the fact that publications from India is rising, and we are following a sort of similar trend to China. And actually, if you can't tell the colors apart, that's India, that's China. And as opposed to the rest of the world where publication is plateauing, India is raising, albeit quite a few years behind China. But what we can see is actually while the publication is increasing, the usage of research isn't as great as compared to other countries. So for example, India only has 71% of its content that is used or cited, as opposed to China, which has 80% of its content used and cited. And so there is opportunity for us here to actually work with Indian research and Indian researchers to make more of that Indian research visible. And there is a lot for us to think about why. Why is Indian research not as much used, though publication output has kind of skyrocketed recently? And one thing for us to start is maybe dive back down really, really early in a person's life and think about education. So this is lifted from a Nature Spotlight that they published last year. And actually, this looks at 4 sort of key areas of growth: health, economy, education, and equity. And if you actually see, India spends much more on education compared to even the developed countries of the world. But what do we spend this money on education for? Education in India, even today, is deeply technical. And there is a sort of obsession in the country to getting students to go towards more professional degrees like medical or engineering, which obviously means that there is opportunity for us to kind of reshape the education system. The government is becoming a bit more aware of this and wants to bring more focus into research, and has been working, for example, with companies like publishers like Springer Nature through Macmillan Education in trying to kind of push kids to think more of sort of creativity and research and asking research questions early on in their life. There is more we can do here, but even the little that is already going on has actually led to a lot of different types of research emerging. And what research that used to be focused on research institutes or some universities have actually now propagated, and everything that here in this slide now has a star actually do research in some form or the other. And like what Kishore was saying, there is a lot of untapped potential. I think the biggest institutes come out and have the sort of infrastructure and the knowledge of how to interact with publishers and how to publish, but there is loads of untapped potential in there for us to actually work with. And with this increased sort of interest in research from multiple types of institutes, what we also see is an increased amount of PhD. PhD students coming out and graduates coming out with PhDs in India. And in fact, much more than China and USA. So there is a lot of Indian research, but where are we with it in terms of growth? India always was good at mathematics. We know this for centuries now. And actually, I have learned recently that mathematics books is one that has long-standing established relationships of working with the Indian research ecosystem. So maybe there is something for us to lift a leaf from that book and learn how we can implement across other research. But there is also loads of other research that has recently taken precedence. These are some examples of research that has come out of India in the last year. Things that look at addressing local problems, like how do we cure snake bites, or looking at the Indian ecology, or the manufacturing industry, or digital health, or of course, you've all heard of the Indian space program, but India is also big in infectious disease. But a lot of this research, given that the funding has just started, is very much at its infancy. And there is, for us as publishers to learn to give it time and space to grow. We are very much, Indian research, I would say, in some parts, like especially clinical research, is very much in its data collection phase. And there is much more sort of time before full-on research happens, before innovation happens. And I think that a couple of years ago, I had heard a talk at Springer Nature by this collective called IAVI, which stands for International AIDS Vaccine Initiative, that spoke about research in Africa. And they said that, African research right now is very much in the data collection phase. And journals are, in fact, turning down a lot of the research because they think, why are you publishing the same thing that somebody else has already said? But if the local data collection doesn't happen, then there is no room for growth of local research. And I think India, in many, many fields, is very much like that. So I think as a group of editors, publishers, people supporting, working in tandem with the publishing industry, we need to allow research to grow in India and allow it to take its shape and try and give visibility to what we can. But while there is cool research coming out and research that is growing, there is also some major challenges for us to think of how to work with the community on. One of the biggest, something that India has to figure out itself, but something that we as publishers and in publishing industry can contribute to, is how can we help the Indian research ecosystem address the lack of infrastructure. So when we send, as an editor, when I send back a request for revisions, sometimes I see that Indian researchers do not have the infrastructure to actually do what we ask them to do. And I think that when we are at the receiving end of research, we should just be mindful of what is really possible, but allow them to publish quality work anyway. There is also a deep-rooted lack of awareness where we can all contribute by trying to talk about the publishing process a bit more, what options are available. There is sort of a historic bias in India where people tend to go to what they know very well, like the journals that they know, the publishers that they know, the societies that they know. But we've all evolved and we've boomed in the number of journals, the number of initiatives. I think we need to also talk to them about what we have to offer and that there is a home for all types of research from India. There is also a lot of Indian research that focuses on the need for urgent solutions, which also means that there is a fight for the funding that is there in the country, which focuses more on addressing local problems. Like I spoke about, there were research that came out about how to fight for antivenom for snake bites. That's because India has the highest rate of death by snake bite. So there is also a sort of need for addressing sort of sustainable solutions on local problems. The other problem, the other challenge that I have often seen when dealing with research from India is researchers unable to demonstrate impact of their science. And this does not mean that language is a barrier, as opposed to what many people think. Actually, all of us did, most of us in India study in English, and so English is often, language is not the barrier, but I think it's much more about articulation of the science and about how do you tell a story. And I think we, as publishers, have work cut out for ourselves on how we try and talk about this with them. There is I'm not going to deny it. There is a raise in research integrity, but the research integrity issues, but lots of this comes with lack of awareness. And I think we have a unique opportunity here, which we kind of missed with China, which is going there early and trying to educate and work with the researchers in trying to bring up the standards of research and shape the research community. We know, and I'm not going to delve too much into this, which is that there is a lack of funding for open access and publishing open access. But you've heard a little bit from Kishore on what they're going to do, and Chris is going to cover this in a bit more detail, so I'm going to skip that, but it was just there to tell you that there is this challenge. But also competing with countries like China, there is a large push now for quantity over quality. You now need to have, like China asks, at least 2 publications in order to get your PhD, and some universities even ask for publications for masters. So there is a sort of push for quantity over quality, and I think we need to try and go in there to educate and say, try and bring up quality science as opposed to quantity. A lot of it is also with assumed constraints. If you go and ask an Indian researcher, why wouldn't you consider submitting, let's say, to scientific reports where I work, they'd be like, oh, that's too high an ask for us. Like, we don't want to aim that high. But actually, we would totally publish their research. So I think there is a lot of assumed constraints in there about what they can do, where their research can go, and who they can reach. And kind of working with that is very important. And finally, there are sort of cultural barriers to the whole thing, as is in any other country. But there is a lot of hierarchical thinking. A student would never question their PI, asking them, if you wanted to submit somewhere, I think that there is a better place for us, or why don't we push in this direction? And I think that we should try and be mindful of the fact that there may be some cultural barriers that has impeded work. All of this obviously influences the choice, and I was asked actually, where do Indian authors choose to publish and why, or what drives their choice of journals? And I had like a mini survey of all the Indian researchers that I work with, a lot of them people who have recently left the research ecosystem and moved into editing. But the thing that comes out on top is reputation. So it is a reputation of the journal that kind of drives where they publish. And that's what picks where their supervisor would take their science to. Of course, the thing that we all do not want to hear is on top of their minds, which is impact factors. There is also a lot of bias in previous publishing history. So where their boss published before is where they will publish, and also where they want to be seen in line with their peers. So they will go and look where people from the West are publishing. So this is where they take the science. There is a lot of historic bias on what journals are good, what journals are not good, and they are not willing to rewrite that history as easily. Of course, they don't want to have any cost of publishing, because what we don't really understand is, or know possibly, is that sometimes researchers, even PhD students, pay out of their pocket for APCs. And an APC in a journal like ours would be an annual salary for some researchers. So it's not even monthly, it's annual salary. So I think it's important for us as publishers to be mindful of that. And of course, because of this whole push for sort of getting a degree to have publication, they want fast turnaround times. And the most recent one, like the CAS list for China, is the UGC CARE list for India. I don't know how many of you have heard of this. It is a sort of sign of quality. So this is a direct sort of way to work with the rise in sort of predatory journals in India. And so getting listed in UGC CARE is a way of saying, we know that this journal stands for quality. So we spoke a lot in this conference about equity, and I think it's important to right or wrong with China in terms of not being prepared to try and think of equity for Indian research as opposed to bringing equality and diversity. And India loves face-to-face interactions. So if you go and meet somebody face-to-face, they will tend to trust you a lot more than somebody who sends an email. So I think it is very, very important to build a local team of editors and publishers who can go out into the community and do their talking. We are doing this now for China, but China has already had their publishing boom. whereas we have an opportunity to do this early and do this well for India. We also have to think, in the first slide, I talked a lot about Indian research not getting visibility, but I think we also need to work on trying to give that visibility to Indian research. So we can think of how better we can interact with Indian researchers and highlight their voices, including their challenges, and address their concerns. We want to kind of be aware that there is a diversity of thought in India. There are some deep-rooted sort of ideologies, and just be open to the idea that research might be different, the research areas might be different, and the way they approach a problem might be different. Go beyond what Kishore had already said, go beyond the well-known institutes. India has some really rising stars and people who have been the chief editor of several well-known journals in the world, but then there is also, also colleges that have just started their research. So there is a lot of room for us to go out there and get the papers that, and books and other things, like fostering sort of research from these smaller institutions is where we're going to get the volume from. There is a lot on us as publishers to raise awareness, both on the publishing industry, but also standards of publishing, what is quality, and have local training programs. As an Indian, I can tell you that we like classroom training. Do not ask me why. When we have a couple of slides up on the podium, this is what we relate to, this is what we like, this is what we imbibe. And this is what I have seen when I have set up a team in India recently, that while I have trained editors both in the US and the UK remotely during the pandemic, for India, they need to see you face to face. They need to see some slides, and they have to work with you like that. So consider how you go out into the local communities, have training programs. If you don't already have partners in India or offices in India, consider it, because I think the ability to kind of also give them job opportunities where then you bring in researchers who then can go out into their research networks and talk about you is a good way. I know that this is like kind of preaching to the converted, because we've already done this in the West and it's worked, but I think India is such a big research ecosystem that is a bit unknown. That's the only way to crack it, I would say. Go there, try it. Also, the training that you give, please tailor it to the local community, I would say, because like I said, there are people and people and people, and they learn differently. Indians learn very differently. Indians need to see it in a book. They go by what they see in a book. They also have a way of trusting what they see, so they don't question, and maybe you have to prompt them to question certain things. So finally, I just wanted to say, consider how to break their barriers. You know, APC, local publishing models, etc. Of course, interact with early career researchers, go into their institutes and work to build trust and offer job opportunities. With that, I will say thank you and ask you to think of these two things, which is, in your experience, the biggest challenge you've had with working with Indian researchers, and where do you think how you think can we draw Indian researchers to come and work with us? With that, I say thank you and hand over to Chris.
Thank you very much. So I want to make sure we've got time for questions. So I'm going to plow through this relatively quickly. I'll skip past the agenda. I'll provide a little bit of context about who AAAS are very quickly. So I don't think a lot of people have heard of AAAS. I think everyone has heard of the Science family of journals, of science. So AAAS is a non-profit publisher of science. And actually, one of the things that AAAS is really looking at is India and the huge amount of growth that we see and potential in India. So for AAAS, India is a touchpoint country. That means our scientific diplomacy teams are there. That means our international affairs teams are there. Our CEO is visiting, and really seeing this growth in the future and what we can do as an organization. So I'm here talking largely from the perspective of the Science Partner Journal Program. So we worked with KGL to look at India. This is one of the growth areas we see in the future and really want to focus on. Skip through this very quickly. This is our partner publishing program, started in 2017. There's 18 titles now. Most of those titles actually started with China. We're really looking to diversify and globalize and work with other partners throughout the world. So it does seem a little strange to start talking about India by focusing on China.
But actually, I think this quote probably says everything I want to say about that. Is, we've seen this with China that, in terms of the quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. We've seen a huge amount of growth in China, particularly in the last decade, actually particularly in the last 5 years. And when we project into the next decade, into 20 years later even, we really see that India will be that next scientific superpower. What can we do to prepare for that? And I think what I'm trying to really say here is, what did we learn from China? How do we prepare our journals? Have we prepared our journals for this huge influx of submissions? And can we do the same for India? What lessons can we learn there? And I'll come on to that a little bit later. So looking at the science family, one of the things I wanted to look at today was a question, is there a surge? And so when we look at the science data, not yet. Now, I think actually a lot of this might have to do with what we were talking before about this assumed constraints. It's a very high barrier for entry for the science family. And actually, when you look more broadly, looking at the actual publication volume and those growth rates, and thanks to KGL for this data, the growth rate is actually very high. So looking at a compounded annual growth rate of about 7.6% over the last decade, compared to the US, down at 0.6%, that is massive. That is a huge amount of growth. Now, we have to say this is starting from a low volume, but actually over, again, the timelines we're sort of thinking about, the next 10 years, this is going to be a big area of growth for all of us. And so what I wanted to focus on here is just usage. And I'll go into the numbers in a second, but why usage? So I'm seeing usage as a leading indicator. And there's two things I really want to highlight on this. The first is actually how highly ranked India is. Now, that's partly because there's a very large population, but also, actually, there's a large demand for the consumption of content. I think what's striking on the left here, as I see it, is with India in the science.org, where it's 6th, it's pushing into 5th place pretty quickly, and we're seeing an increase there. But for our partner journals, which are newer, have probably more of a burgeoning reputation, India is in 1st place. And actually, that's particularly striking, given that most of these titles actually have Chinese partners. And so we have always seen China in #1, and India is really beginning to push there. And so we're interpreting this as the beginning of a surge. We're saying, well, actually, if usage is growing, we are very likely to see submissions growing very quickly after that. And I think, yes, that is the case, particularly when you compare this to the other countries, particularly in the top 10, we see a lot of submissions. And when we compare it to other countries, perhaps in BRICS, so Brazil, to pick on Brazil, we don't see the same levels of usage. And so I think really begin to see the early indications of a significant growth in submissions coming through. So very quickly, yes, surge in submissions, but when? And I think the good news, to spin it this way, is if it's not yet, which I think you're beginning to see in some of the data, actually, I'll go back a little bit, because when I was looking at some of the scientific reports data, actually, the scientific reports has been very steady in terms of publications from India. And then in this year, 2024, they've already published as many as they did this time than they had last year. And that's from Web of Science data. So that's also slightly backwards. So actually, I think scientific reports in particular are seeing a surge coming in from India. But the good news, I think, for the rest of us is there's time to prepare. What can we do? How do we build these relationships? How do we start this position so that with China we have an opportunity to maximize the submissions coming into our journals and to publish the very best research? And so we split this into 3 areas. And so the first is editorial boards. This is a particular focus for us on the Science Partner Journal program. So as I mentioned, a lot of those partners are Chinese institutions. One of the things that Chinese institutions are very keen on doing is diversifying their editorial boards. Of course, when those journals launch, they have largely Chinese editorial board members. They are very keen, both from a sort of governmental and international perspective, to make sure they're as diverse as possible. So when we're looking at that, we're saying, okay, what are the focuses? And the focus we have are US, Western Europe, and India. And so as a practical example here, we ran an ad in ResearchGate. We made sure we leveraged ResearchGate, great reach and huge usage in India to recruit for editorial board members. And actually, I have to say this was a real success. So we had 95 applications. And I think what was really striking is those applications were of the highest quality. Often when you put out ads like this, you don't get a lot of quality. We had every single one had a great cover letter with some really strong CVs. And so we're really confident, as they were reviewed, we're going to add a lot of editorial board members from India. The next is focus. So it's a somewhat obvious thing to say that India is an extremely large country. You saw some of the data put in front of us. So where do you start? It's that kind of eat the elephant situation. There's too much there, so how do you start? And so we're working with KGL. We've got this list of the most the institutions producing the most amount of articles and said, well, where do we stack up on this? You know, are we focused? And so the ones in bold, there's sort of 4 out of the top 5, are where we're already having articles published within the science family, within the science partner journal program. But there's a very long tail there. There's a lot of institutions we do not have publications with. And of course, there's a variety of reasons for that. But I think we can really frame this as an opportunity. You know, these are the kind of the institutions that we need to build relationships with. We need to bring editorial board members on. We need to do brand marketing with. We really need to focus on to get in those early stages and build on those foundations. And the final sort of topic on what we should do now is aligning research topics and journals, and actually looking at future journals as well. So we do have more granular data on this, but again, working with KGL, we looked at those top research topics supported by India's funders, and that's by volume, and said, well, actually, if India is a focus for all of our titles in the partner journal program, is it a focus for some of those titles in particular? And so 3 we have here: energy material advances, intelligent computing, plant phenomics, align very neatly with these research topics. The other part of this is looking at new titles when we're launching them. So later this year, we'll be launching an engineering title. Again, India will be a focus for that title from the very beginning. There's a very strong alignment there. And so I think the key here is really making sure that when we're launching titles, we're not launching a title for the next year. So when we're launching a title, I think the focus isn't just on the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years. It's making that title last many decades. And India is going to be really key for that. So thinking about that long-term future as well. So all of this doesn't go without challenges. And as mentioned before, I'll talk a little bit more about this. So what am I showing you here? These are quotes from librarians throughout India, again, as part of the research we carried out in partnership with KGL. And I think one of the striking things with this feedback, but also is more feedback, is little APC funding. So I should be very crystal clear in saying with the science family, 5 of the journals in the family follow a green open access model, so it doesn't follow a gold, there's no APCs, so it's less of a challenge for that. Science Advances, which is our premier gold open access title, there are APCs, and the science partner journals are all APCs as well, although a few of those titles will stay as diamond for a little bit longer. But actually, the question mark here is, how do we deal with the head-on collision between this huge growth in submissions, this growth in quality, there's going to be a lot of great papers coming out, and the inability to pay. And I wish I could stand up here and say I have an answer. This is hopefully something we can talk about as a group, and interested in anyone's perspectives on whether they've addressed this. I think ONOS has been addressed, has a lot of potential. There is money being put aside within that for open access publication. I think you said 1.5 billion or so. That probably is going to be a tiniest dip in the ocean over what is available. So there's going to be a lot of competition between publishers for those funds. I think the future of ONOS is also somewhat difficult to predict. It always seems to be one more ahead, so keeping a very close eye on that. But what other models can we employ as well? So for now, to be crystal clear, we use a lot of waivers. I think waivers works for right now. I think when we start to see that surge gets into the levels, we see with China, that's unsustainable. And so how do we find that balance? It's not really fair of me to stand up here and provide no answers, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. But I think I'll move on to my conclusion slide, is to say, I think this is probably the conclusion from all our topics, is that growth is coming. I think that is inevitable. We're going to see a lot of growth from India. It's something we need to be positioning ourselves for right now. It's going to be focused in certain areas, certain key topics. We're going to need to prepare those journal foundations for that future growth. I know we're all very resource poor. There's a lot of things we have to do. We haven't even mentioned artificial intelligence, which seems to be in every talk, so I have to mention that really. There's a lot of things we have to do, but actually we do have to keep an eye on the future as well, and those growth areas. So what can we do right now to prepare for India? And then the last one is, coming back to my point around APCs, is how do we face up to this APC challenge? I don't want to divert our talk into a future about open access business models. We could be here all day. It's been talked to death. But actually, how do we think about this? And are there other ways to do this? And with that point, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So we may have time for a very quick question, and I also want to just remind everybody that there will be 5 minutes between sessions before you can come back into the room here. Well, you can come back in, but the name of the next one is Make Better Decisions, Uncover Insights from Your Marketing Data. Question? in the back.
It's not really a question, it's just an observation, right? I'm Haring Küster, I'm now with CSIRO Publishing. Before I moved to Australia, I actually planned 3 weeks on a bus in India, going on the famous Indian bus tour, right? So I've been around India in September, October quite a lot. And I think we visited in that time on 4,500 kilometers on a bus in India, 14 institutions, and partially stayed in accommodation provided by that. It was an interesting trip, right? It was absolutely interesting. What we have trouble observing and understanding is the difference between the institutions, really. So you've got the absolutely amazing, amazing IIT institutions at the top. They are fantastic. They are up there with the best. And when you walk about Bangalore or when you walk about Chennai, you feel like you could be in Harvard and somewhere else. But the flip side to the coin is, if you start driving around the country, the gap between the normal institutions and those high-level institutions is bigger than we can imagine as Europeans and as Westerners. It's much bigger, and you really have to think about it. And we all the time got asked, oh, can I have a free APC? And when you have the G7 logo on your bus, then India needs to realize that they need to spend more than 0.7% on their GDP on research. Otherwise, they go to the moon and take a selfie. And the second thing is they might not be able to pay the full APCs. They might be able to pay something, and they need to pay something to see that there's a value in publishing. If you keep going on for free, and we said that on the stage several times in public, if you keep giving something for free, you tell the audience that there's a perceived non-value around. Anyway, it's not a question, it's a statement. And
Thank you.
And thank you.
Regrettably, I think we are at our time, but I will offer that I think the panelists will be up in the front if you want to come up afterward and ask questions or find them at some point. But that's it for now, and thank you very much.